The town of Raven's Hollow lay cradled in a narrow canyon, shrouded in a thick morning mist that rolled down from the timber-bird hills like ghostly rivers. Wooden buildings, darkened by age and smoke, leaned against one another as if clinging for support. The air smelled of damp earth, pine, and the faint tang of the river that wound through the settlement. It was the kind of place where secrets festered, and strangers were watched with suspicion. From the fog emerged a lone rider. His horse was coal-black, moving silently along the narrow dirt path that led into town. The rider himself was imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair streaked by the sun, braided with beads and feathers that caught the mist in their shine. His skin was weathered and tan, marked by the scars of battles fought long ago. No one in Raven's Hollow had ever seen an Apache like him, and whispers would have spread had anyone dared to speak. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon, a fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across rough-hewn walls. The saloon was quiet, the piano silent, and only a few cowhands lingered over mugs of watered whiskey. At a corner table sat Isolde Carrington, 30 years old, with a presence that made her impossible to ignore. Her auburn hair fell in loose waves, partially covering her sharp green eyes, which darted to the door every few moments. Restless and alert, she had come to Raven's Hollow for reasons she could not yet voice, a secret gnawing at her soul. Widowhood had brought her here, to the edge of civilization, to run her late husband's modest trading post along the river. She carried grief like a stone in her chest, but also a dangerous truth, one that had long been buried under a mask of composure. Today that mask was about to crack. The saloon's door creaked, and a few patrons glanced up instinctively. Through the swirling mist outside, the Apache stepped inside, boots silent yet heavy in their presence. The temperature seemed to drop, the fog following him into the warm interior like a specter. He moved with careful, deliberate precision, stopping a few feet from Isolde's table. Their eyes met hers sharp with resolve, his dark and unreadable, yet shadowed by an emotion she could not name. She had glimpsed him before, near the riverbank, always watching, always silent. His arrival was no coincidence. She knew that instinctively. I can't hold it in anymore, Isolde said, voice trembling despite her effort to appear strong. The words, finally released, felt like a key turning in a lock. She could no longer bear the secret alone, could no longer live in fear of the consequences if she did not speak. The Apache's expression changed, just for a moment. His usual stoic mask faltered, revealing a storm beneath. He hesitated, dark eyes flickering with something like fear, guilt, and uncertainty. The space between them thickened, charged with unspoken danger. You shouldn't speak of such things here, he murmured, voice low, almost a growl. Yet the warning carried hesitation, as though he understood the impossible decision he faced and dreaded its consequences. Isolde leaned forward, her hand shaking slightly over her glass. I don't care anymore. You have to know, or I'll lose myself completely. The Apache's jaw tightened. He moved closer, his shadow falling over her like a cloak of inevitability. His fingers brushed against the edge of the table, not touching her, yet close enough to send a shiver down her spine. The fog outside pressed against the windows, a silent witness to the tension spiraling between them. I cannot do this, he said finally, voice heavy with weight, warning, and unspoken horror. Something dark and irreversible lingered behind those words, a decision that could destroy them both if it came to pass. Before either could react, the saloon door burst open again. A figure appeared, outlined by the faint gray light of the misted canyon morning. The sudden presence shifted the atmosphere, making every heartbeat loud and every shadow seem alive. In that instant, Isolde realized the secret she had tried to bury and the terrifying choice he was about to make would no longer remain hidden, and the first hint of horror began to unfurl in the fog. The fog outside Raven's Hollow thickened, curling through the narrow canyon streets like a living creature. Inside the Silver Spur saloon, the muted light from the fireplace flickered against the walls, casting long, restless shadows. The Apache remained standing near Isolde's table, his dark gaze locked onto hers, as though he could see through the layers of her composure and into the secret she had carried for so long. "Can't keep it hidden any longer," Isolde whispered, her fingers tightening around the rim of her whiskey glass. Her knuckles were white, her heartbeat echoing loudly in her ears. "You have to know, or I'll—" Her voice faltered, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the saloon. The Apache's chest rose and fell with a slow, controlled rhythm. His usual stoicism was fractured by the weight of her words. For a moment, he seemed caught between two worlds, the disciplined restraint of his warrior nature and a dangerous, unthinkable compulsion stirring beneath the surface. "You shouldn't speak of such things here," he said again, his voice low, almost reverent, yet carrying an edge of warning. He shifted slightly, the dim light glinting off the tribal beads in his hair and the scars etched across his tanned skin. Isolde leaned forward, her green eyes shimmering with raw emotion. "I don't care. I've carried this for too long. You need to hear it. I can't survive if I stay silent any longer." Her words trembled, but there was an iron resolve beneath the quiver, a challenge to fate itself. The Apache's eyes darkened. His shadow stretched across the table like a creeping threat. He raised a hand, then lowered it, unsure whether to touch her or keep his distance. Every muscle in his body was tense, coiled like a spring, and yet his expression betrayed fear not for himself, but for what revealing her secret might force him to do. "Isolde," he began, his deep voice a hushed growl, "what you speak of, it cannot remain hidden. And if it surfaces—" He trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought, though the implication was clear. A sudden noise at the saloon door startled them both. The fog had thickened so completely outside that it seemed like a living wall, swallowing the canyon and muffling sound. A stranger silhouette emerged, but the Apache did not flinch. He simply tensed, like a predator aware of another presence in his territory. Isolde's pulse quickened. "You know what's coming," she said softly, almost accusingly. "You hesitate because of what you might have to do." The Apache's jaw clenched. He took a single, deliberate step closer. The air between them became suffocating, charged with an almost tangible danger. His dark eyes glimmered with something horrifying, something that made Isolde's stomach twist. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice hoarse. This choice. It changes everything." "I can't." His words were cut short as he lowered his head slightly, struggling against the storm of emotion within him. Isolde's hand hovered over the table, close to his, but not touching. "Then tell me," she demanded. "Tell me what it is. I deserve to know before it's too late." The Apache exhaled slowly, his nostrils flaring as if each breath drew in the fog itself. His muscles flexed under the dim light, his bare torso tense and imposing, the tribal jewelry glinting like tiny warnings. He was a man torn between duty, desire, and a darkness that threatened to consume them both. He began again, voice low and uneven. "If I do what I must, you may never forgive me, and yet, I can't let this remain hidden." His eyes darted briefly toward the saloon door, as though the mist outside might carry them all into ruin. Isolde felt a chill despite the fire. "Whatever it is, I'll survive it," she said firmly. "But I need to know. I can't live in fear of the unknown anymore." For a long, tense moment, neither spoke. The Apache's dark gaze was locked on her, and in it, Isolde glimpsed the shadow of something monstrous, something terrifying that he wrestled with silently. His next move would define the rest of their lives. The weight of his hesitation hung over them, heavier than any weapon, more dangerous than any rival or outlaw in Raven's Hollow. Then, without warning, he turned sharply, moving toward the back of the saloon. His hand went to his belt, and a faint metallic glint caught the flickering firelight. Isolde's heart skipped a beat. She instinctively knew that whatever he was about to do would not only expose the secret she had carried, but also plunge them both into a darkness from which there might be no return. And as the fog pressed against the saloon windows like a living thing, the Apache warrior prepared to make a choice so horrifying that Raven's Hollow would never be the same. The Apache's shadow stretched across the worn wooden floor, moving with a predator's precision toward the back of the Silver Spur saloon. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. Every muscle in his body seemed coiled, ready to spring, yet his eyes betrayed the storm within, a maelstrom of fear, anger, and something far more terrifying. He began, but no words followed. Instead, he reached for something at his belt, the faint glint of metal catching the flickering firelight. Isolde's heart thumped so hard she feared it might betray her fear. She had faced men with guns, with knives, and with grudges, but the darkness she now saw in him was unlike anything she had encountered. "Wait!" she gasped, standing abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Whatever you're about to do, listen to me first. I need you to hear me." The Apache paused, muscles taut like steel cables. His dark eyes flicked toward her, filled with indecipherable emotion. For a heartbeat, he seemed to waver, as though her plea had reached some fragile part of his heart. But the tension in his jaw, the rigid line of his shoulders, betrayed the inevitability of what was coming. "You don't understand," he growled, his voice low, almost a warning to himself rather than to her. "This, what I must do, it cannot be undone. Once it begins—" His voice trailed off, swallowed by the fog of his own hesitation. Isolde took a cautious step closer. "Then let me help. I can't keep this secret alone. You don't have to carry it yourself. Whatever it is, we can face it together." For a long moment, he simply stared. His hand hovered near the object at his belt, knuckles whitening around it. Then, almost imperceptibly, he shook his head. The darkness in his gaze deepened, like a storm cloud blackening the canyon above Raven's Hollow. A sudden crash outside the saloon made them both flinch. The fog pressed against the wooden walls, swirling through cracks and doorways, carrying with it the faint echoes of a world that seemed to hold its breath. The Apache's instincts sharpened. Every sense was alert, every muscle primed for action. He was a man trained to survive, yet even he could not predict the choices that now forced themselves upon him. Isolde's hands trembled as she stepped fully into his space, daring to reach for his arm. "Please," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "I can't bear the weight of this alone. Don't let it destroy us before it even begins." The Apache's eyes softened for a fleeting instant, enough for her to glimpse the human beneath the warrior's mask. But that glimpse vanished as quickly as it came. With a sudden, fluid motion, he drew the object from his belted dagger. Its blade curved and wicked, catching the firelight in a cruel gleam. Isolde's stomach dropped. Her mind raced, terror clawing at her. "No, don't," she cried, but the sound seemed to vanish into the fog-laden room, unheard. The Apache hesitated for a heartbeat, just long enough for the weight of her words to pierce him. Then, with a grim, almost mournful expression, he took a step forward. The weapon was raised not at her, but toward the shadows of the saloon behind her, where something or someone lurked in the fog. "You don't know," he muttered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fury and anguish. "I can't let this remain. unchecked. Isolde's green eyes widened in realization. The horrifying act he contemplated was not meant to harm her, it was something else. Something darker, something he deemed necessary to protect both her and the town. Fear and relief collided within her. Leaving her momentarily paralyzed, the fog swirled through the open windows, dancing across the floor like spectral fingers. The Apache's bare chest gleamed with sweat, his tribal jewelry jingling softly as he moved. Every instinct screamed at him to act, yet his hesitation lingered, an invisible chain holding him at the precipice of choice. Finally, with a deliberate, almost ceremonial motion, he lunged. The dagger arced through the dim light, catching a shadow in its path. A scream of guttural, unearthly sound filled the room, echoing off the timber-bird walls. Isolde stumbled back, clutching her chest as the reality of what he had done hit her in waves. The Apache stood motionless, chest heaving, eyes wide with the gravity of his action. The fog seemed to retreat slightly, as if recoiling from the horror he had unleashed. Isolde could barely breathe, her heart pounding in her ears. You did it," she whispered, disbelief and fear mingling in her voice. What have you done?" He lowered the dagger slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I had no choice," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It was the only way to keep you, to keep everything from unraveling." Isolde's mind raced, trying to comprehend the impossible. The Apache's horrifying choice had begun, and there was no turning back. The scream had barely faded when silence reclaimed the Silver Spur saloon, broken only by the faint crackle of the dying fire in the hearth. Isolde's green eyes were wide with shock, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she struggled to comprehend what she had just witnessed. The Apache warrior stood motionless, chest heaving, dagger lowered. The weight of his action etched into every line of his muscular frame. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, each second pressing down on them like the fog that still drifted through the open windows. Isolde's mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. Her body wanted to run, to flee from the horror she had seen, yet some inexplicable force rooted her in place. "You?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of her own heartbeat. You did it? Why?" The Apache's dark eyes, usually so inscrutable, were now clouded with torment. He exhaled slowly, the motion deliberate, almost ritualistic. "It had to be done," he said, voice low and heavy with guilt. "There was no other way. The town, you. Everything would have been lost if I had not acted." Isolde took a cautious step forward, still trembling, yet driven by the need to understand. "Lost? What? What could possibly justify that? What? Who?" She stopped herself, realizing the answer might be more horrifying than she could bear. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, his gaze swept the room, lingering on the shadows in the corners, the fog pressing against the windows, and finally back to her. His muscles were still tense, his bare chest glistening with sweat, tribal jewelry catching the firelight in a subtle, almost mournful glimmer. The air between them was thick with danger and unspoken truths. "You were in danger," he said finally, his voice trembling slightly. "Not just you, but everyone here. There are forces at work you cannot see, secrets buried long before you arrived. And some things cannot be allowed to continue. I stopped it. I had no choice." Isolde's heart pounded, a mix of fear, disbelief, and reluctant understanding washing over her. She had come to Raven's Hollow with secrets of her own, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. The Apache's actions were horrifying, yes, but beneath them lay a logic only he could perceive, a brutal, unyielding protection that she could neither fully comprehend nor ignore. "You think I understand," she said slowly, her voice firmer now despite the quiver in her hands. But I don't, not yet. You've done something terrible, something unforgivable. And yet, she paused, searching his dark eyes for any sign of remorse, any hint that he had acted without conscience. And yet, I see why you did it. The Apache's gaze softened, just slightly, though the shadow of his actions remained heavy upon him. I am bound by my own code, he said quietly, almost to himself. It is not mercy nor cruelty, but necessity. You may never forgive me. I may never forgive myself. But it had to be done. The fog outside thickened again, wrapping the town in an eerie, almost suffocating silence. Isolde looked toward the door, then back at him, realizing that their lives were now irrevocably intertwined. The horror he had unleashed was only the beginning, a warning that the calm surface of Raven's Hollow concealed much darker currents beneath. Then we need to be careful, she said finally, her voice steadying. If there are others, if there are more dangers like this, we cannot let them catch us unaware. The Apache nodded slowly, his expression unreadable once more, yet the tension in his shoulders remained. He did not speak, but the weight of his presence, muscular, imposing, haunted, filled the room as effectively as words. For the first time, Isolde understood the complexity of the man before her. He was a warrior, yes, but also a protector, bound by rules she could not fully grasp. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and determination, that surviving Raven's Hollow and whatever shadows threatened it would depend upon both of them, outside. The fog continued to swirl through the canyon, hiding secrets and threats alike. The Apache's horrifying act had altered the course of their lives, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of the saloon. Whatever came next, Isolde knew they would face it together or not at all. The dagger was still in his hand, the firelight gleaming off its curved blade, a silent reminder of the darkness that had been unleashed and the uncertain future that now awaited them both. The fog outside Raven's Hollow thickened as night fell, swallowing the narrow canyon streets in a suffocating embrace. Inside the Silver Spur saloon, the firelight flickered over the hardwood floor, casting restless shadows that danced along the walls. The Apache warrior stood near the hearth, bare chest gleaming with sweat, dagger in hand, his dark eyes scanning the room with relentless intensity. Isolde Carrington remained close, her hands still trembling slightly. Yet there was a fire in her green eyes, now a determination born of fear and understanding. The horrifying act the Apache had committed earlier was still fresh in her mind, a grim reminder of the dangerous world they inhabited. And yet, she knew that the town itself was not safe, that threats hidden in the mist and shadows had not been fully revealed. Are you certain there's no one else? She asked quietly, her voice steady despite the tension tightening her chest. No other threats waiting in the fog? The Apache's gaze swept the room once more, his muscles taut under the dim firelight, every nerve alert. I have not sensed any. Not yet. But the danger is not gone, he said, voice low and resonant, carrying both warning and fatigue. Raven's Hollow is a place of secrets, and some secrets do not remain buried forever. Isolde nodded slowly. Then we need to be prepared, she said, determination hardening her tone. Whatever comes, we face it together. I cannot let fear rule me. Not now. The Apache's lips tightened, a rare hint of a smile flickering and vanishing immediately. Few understand the nature of what I do, he murmured. The choices we make, the actions we take, they haunt us. And yet, sometimes they are necessary. You may not fully comprehend it yet, Isolde, but you will see. The tension in the room was palpable, each shadow seeming to hide 1,000 dangers. Suddenly, the saloon door banged open, rattling against the wall with a hollow clang. The Apache's instincts sharpened instantly. Muscles coiled like springs, dagger raised. The fog pressed against the threshold, and a figure emerged, half hidden in the swirling mist. Isolde gasped. Another one. She whispered, realization dawning. Whoever this was, the danger they represented was immediate and deadly. The figure stepped forward slowly, revealing a rugged man, his face partially hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. He carried no weapon that was visible, yet the air around him felt heavy with threat. The Apache's gaze narrowed, assessing every motion, every twitch of muscle. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, voice low, deliberate. "This place, it's no longer safe for outsiders." The man's eyes flicked to Isolde, lingering with something unreadable. "I've heard whispers," he said, "about a woman and a warrior, about a secret that shouldn't exist. I came to see if the stories were true." Isolde felt a shiver run down her spine. The horrifying act the Apache had committed was no longer isolated, it had drawn attention, and attention in Raven's Hollow always brought danger. The Apache's stance hardened. "You know nothing of what has occurred here. Leave now, or you will witness horrors you cannot unsee." His words were more than a warning. They carried the weight of inevitability, a promise of violence if defiance persisted. The newcomer's lips curled into a faint, cold smile. "I've seen enough to know the truth, warrior," he said. "And the truth will not stay buried." Isolde's heart pounded as the tension escalated, a storm of fear and anticipation swirling between the three of them. The Apache's jaw tightened, his dark eyes flickering with a mixture of rage and desperation. Every instinct screamed at him to protect Isolde, to confront the threat. Yet the fog outside pressed in like a living entity, making the decision agonizing. "Stay behind me," he commanded, voice steady despite the turmoil beneath the surface. His dagger gleamed in the firelight, a silent promise of protection and the unspoken horrors that might come. Isolde nodded, her resolve firming. Whatever secrets, whatever dangers Raven's Hollow held, she would not falter. She would face the coming storm with the Apache warrior at her side, no matter how terrifying the path ahead might be. The fog pressed against the saloon, swallowing the streets and hiding untold threats. And in that moment, Isolde understood the full weight of the horrifying world into which she had been drawn, world where survival required impossible choices, and where darkness waited patiently for even the slightest mistake. The Apache's dagger was poised, his body coiled and ready as the first of the approaching threats emerged from the shadows. Raven's Hollow would never be the same again. The fog outside Raven's Hollow pressed thick against the saloon walls, curling into the room through cracks in the doorframes and broken windows. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon was a storm of shadows and tension. The Apache warrior stood in front of Isolde Carrington, dagger in hand, his muscular torso gleaming with sweat under the flickering firelight. Every nerve in his body was taut, coiled for action, ready to strike at any moment. Isolde's heart pounded in her chest. She had never felt fear like this, not for herself, but for what was about to unfold. The stranger who had stepped into the saloon moments ago did not move, but his presence was electric with menace, a predator surveying the room with cold calculation. Every flicker of firelight revealed glimpses of his rugged features, the hard lines of a man accustomed to confrontation and danger. "You shouldn't have come here," the Apache growled, his voice low and resonant, each word carrying the weight of a man forced to make impossible choices. His dark eyes never left the stranger, calculating, anticipating, ready for the inevitable. The stranger smirked, tilting his hat back just enough to reveal a cold, hard glare. "I've seen whispers, warrior," he said, voice smooth and deliberate, "about a woman, and about what was done here. I wanted to see if the tales were true." Isolde's breath caught. She could feel the danger thickening around them like a storm ready to break. Her mind raced. Had the Apache's horrifying action drawn this man here? And if so, what else awaited them in the fog outside Raven's Hollow? The Apache's jaw tightened. "Leave," he said, voice cutting like steel. "There is nothing for you here. If you stay, you will witness horrors you cannot survive." The stranger's smirk widened. "I've survived worse," he said, stepping closer into the dim light, eyes locked on Isolde. "And I intend to leave knowing the truth. Secrets. They have a way of coming out, no matter how carefully they're buried." The Apache tensed, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. The dagger in his hand gleamed in the firelight, and the tribal beads in his long black hair caught tiny sparks from the hearth. He moved subtly, positioning himself between the stranger and Isolde, a silent promise of protection and impending violence. Isolde's green eyes darted between the two men. "Stop!" she cried, stepping forward. "Please, whatever this is. It doesn't have to end in blood." The Apache's gaze softened, just briefly, before hardening again. "I cannot allow it," he said. "If this man steps any closer, I will do what must be done." His tone left no room for negotiation. The stranger's hand twitched toward his belt, a movement so fast it was almost imperceptible. In a heartbeat, the Apache lunged forward, dagger flashing in a deadly arc. The sound of metal slicing the air echoed in the saloon, mingling with Isolde's sharp intake of breath. Chaos erupted. The Apache moved with lethal precision, muscles rippling, body honed from years of battle. He parried, struck, and maneuvered with a fluidity that seemed almost inhuman, each motion calculated to neutralize the threat. The stranger was skilled, but the warrior's intimate knowledge of danger, honed in the unforgiving wilderness, gave him an edge. Isolde pressed herself against the wall, heart racing, eyes wide as the deadly dance unfolded. Shadows leapt and twisted across the walls as the firelight flickered, the fog outside seeping like a living thing into the room. Finally, the Apache struck decisively, the dagger finding its mark. The stranger fell, a final, rasping breath escaping him before the room fell silent once more. The fog outside seemed to pause, holding its breath along with Isolde. The warrior dropped to one knee, chest heaving, eyes dark with the weight of what he had done. Isolde stepped cautiously toward him, hand trembling as she reached for his arm. "It's over," she whispered, barely able to believe it. He looked up at her, face shadowed, guilt and exhaustion etched deep into his features. "It is never over," he said quietly, voice low, haunted. "There are always more threats, more choices, more darkness." Isolde's heart ached at the sight of him, at the knowledge of the horrors he had endured and the terrifying actions he had taken to protect her. Yet in that moment, she understood the depth of his courage and the weight of his honor. The fog continued to swirl against the saloon windows, hiding the town in a blanket of uncertainty. But inside, for now, there was a fragile stillness. The Apache warrior, muscular, shirtless, adorned with tribal jewelry, stood as both protector and harbinger of the dark truce that bound them together. And Isolde knew that whatever came next, they would face it together or not at all. The fog had finally begun to lift from Raven's Hollow, revealing the first pale hints of dawn. The Silver Spur saloon was quiet now, its timber-bird walls scarred by the violence of the previous night. The Apache warrior, muscular and shirtless, with long black hair cascading over his shoulders and tribal jewelry glinting in the morning light, stood near the doorway, dagger sheathed, body tense yet weary. Isolde Carrington stepped forward cautiously, her auburn hair catching the soft sunlight as her green eyes searched his face. The weight of the horrors they had faced together, the secret revealed, the stranger eliminated, and the choices forced upon them pressed heavily between them. Yet beneath the fear and exhaustion, a fragile thread of trust and understanding had formed, stronger than either of them could have anticipated. You survived, she whispered, voice trembling. She reached out, lightly touching his arm. The warmth of his skin, tempered by the adrenaline and tension of battle, reassured her in a way words could not. The Apache's dark eyes met hers, shadowed yet softer than she had ever seen them. I had to, he said quietly, voice low but steady. For you? For this town. For what had to be done. His words carried the weight of his code, the burdens he had shouldered, and the horrifying choices he had made. Isolde nodded, taking a deep breath. And we did it. We survived. Together. Her words were almost a prayer, acknowledging the bond forged in the crucible of danger. He turned slightly, scanning the saloon one last time. The memories of the night still etched into every shadow, every scar on the wooden floor. Raven's Hollow will never be the same, he murmured. And neither will we. Isolde smiled faintly, a mix of relief and admiration in her eyes. Perhaps, she said softly, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. We've learned what it means to face the darkness, and to survive it. And I think we've proven that courage and honor still exist, even in the most impossible places. The Apache allowed himself a rare moment of quiet, letting the morning sun illuminate the sweat and grime on his muscular torso, the tribal jewelry catching the first golden rays. He felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders, though the memory of his horrifying actions remained, a reminder of the cost of survival. Isolde, he said finally, turning to face her fully, there is one thing I need you to understand. What I did, what I was forced to do, it was not cruelty. It was necessity. There is a darkness in this world, and sometimes we must confront it before it consumes everything we care about. Her gaze softened. I understand, she replied firmly. I may never fully comprehend it, but I know you acted to protect me and this town. That choice, terrible as it was, saved lives. And that includes mine. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. The fog had lifted entirely now, revealing the canyon and the distant hills bathed in early morning light. Raven's Hollow appeared serene and innocent, as if the horrors of the night had been nothing more than a shadow passing through. Yet both of them knew the truth. The darkness was still there, lingering in corners, in whispers, and in memories. Isolde stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. Whatever comes next, she said softly, we face it together. You and I, whatever horrors await, whatever secrets we uncover, we will face them side by side. The Apache warrior allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile, the tension easing slightly from his muscular frame. Then we are bound, he said quietly, by choice, by trust, and by the understanding of what it truly means to survive. Together they stepped out into the morning, the fog retreating from the streets of Raven's Hollow. The canyon was alive with light now, birds calling in the distance, the air crisp and clean. And for the first time since the horrors had begun, there was a sense of hope, a fragile, glowing promise that the darkness could be faced and perhaps even tamed. When courage and trust were united, the Apache warrior, muscular and adorned with tribal jewelry, walked beside Isolde Carrington, their silhouettes framed against the rising sun. The events of the past night would haunt them forever, but they had endured. They had survived. And in the quiet golden light of dawn, Raven's Hollow seemed almost peaceful, as if the town itself acknowledged their victory and the bond forged in terror and necessity. For them, the story was far from over, yet they had proven something vital, that even amidst horror and darkness, honor, courage, and the human heart could prevail.